I'm sure glad I mowed my yard though.
Oh, it needs it.
1/10 of an inch was today?
Well, I think today's another.
You good?
1/10 of an inch.
Okay.
Okay,
But I think
not a whole
we're
lot.
2/10 of an inch. We haven't gotten more than quarters.
Call the October 12th Planning and Zoning Commission meeting to order. Roll call.
Sean Cuff.
Roger Fromm.
Charles Smallwood.
Sylvia Henry.
Catherine Edgar.
Sam Solars.
City Planner Steve Gridman.
Jessica Bonniwell.
If you'd all stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, please.
Oh, you didn't do roll call. No, we didn't.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and
to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, looking for,
Around.
we just did roll call.
Didn't.
We give them names.
Okay,
Said our names.
approval, I'm looking for approval of the agenda.
I approved the agenda as written.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I
Opposed? Okay. Approval of the minutes from the September 14th meeting.
make a motion to approve the minutes.
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay. At 7:02, I'd be closing the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting and opening the public hearing.
All right.
Before us tonight is updated tree replacement regulations, and I'll hand it over to Mr. Gritman at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commission, as you indicated, the item for hearing tonight is proposed amendment to your zoning ordinance and subdivision ordinance, actually, relating to tree preservation and how we both implement our tree preservation objectives and some process to go along with that. And just a little bit of background, the current preservation requirements in the code basically count the total number of inches, the size of trees by species. Applicants are required to submit a tree survey of all the trees on the site. And then for those trees that are healthy and serviceable, they have to identify them by their size and then design a subdivision that is permitted to remove 50% of the total measurement of the cumulative number of trees. Not just number, but the caliper inches or diameter at breast height, the DBH number that is assigned to each one. So they count up all those caliper inches, they design their subdivision. The ordinance allows them to remove 50% for grading, street construction, utility construction, stormwater management, which is always a large one. And then any trees beyond the 50% that they are proposing to take out as part of their plan, they then have to replace on an inch per inch basis. And in some cases, the code even imposes an inch and a half per inch basis, depending on how well the applicants have done designing their project and then building it. What it turns out is that in heavily wooded areas, not surprisingly, the replacement requirement is so burdensome that many times they're required to plant more trees literally than they took down, because when we plant trees, obviously we're only planting smaller stock. Even tree spade stock is still much smaller than the stock that's being taken down. So the code does have a process for mitigating that. It's basically plant an equal number of lost trees in other locations including on city property or on other property that the applicants own, or pay a fee, a fine essentially, for that excess removal. The fact is that it's very rare that they have a lot of room on their property to replant trees, because they're, by the time you've accounted for driveways, houses, utility installations, everything else, there's just not a lot of space to plant that many more trees. There's obviously a handful of trees can go in on most lots, but beyond that, when you account for what their healthy tree crown size would be, you can't plant as many as you've removed. That's the background. Obviously, we've been through a couple of subdivisions here this year that have encountered that as an issue. The first subdivider didn't argue too much. They raised the issue, but they also have about several hundred acres of other land that they owned in the community, and they felt that planting in those areas was something that was likely to happen in any case. So the penalty to them for taking excess trees down was not particularly burdensome on them, at least at the stage that they got their approvals. We'll see if at construction time, if they decide to ask for any more forgiveness, but to the initially in the Northridge project, those developers are proceeding under the existing code. The more recent one, Creekside Hollow, which still has not yet gone to council, but was reviewed by the Planning Commission. Those developers asked essentially to have the excess removal penalty waived altogether, which the city was, at least at the time, not willing to do. The Planning Commission did not recommend that. Staff does not recommend that. The code's the code. But the amount of tree planting that was required as part of the Creekside project, if it's put in place, is likely to impact the success or viability of that project, just because of the huge number of trees that they would have to plant. There's no way that they could plant that replacement on their current site. And to my knowledge, they don't have other property in the community to shift their replanting burden to. So it becomes a financial penalty for them. And the city, while we want to make sure that we're doing the best we can for tree preservation, obviously that's the point of the code, we also balance that with what realistic development requires, so that we can do a good job of building neighborhoods, but not bring development to a halt either as a result of our code. So anyway, that kind of became the genesis for the idea of rethinking our tree preservation requirements. I can say from our experience with this ordinance, as well as other ordinances that we deal with routinely, that this one is on the steep end of requirement. It can be, like I said, burdensome and perhaps potentially interfere with reasonable development planning. So we looked at some other options. We had a discussion about those as a planning commission last month, and we have forwarded to you tonight a proposed ordinance that takes a different approach. And this is one that we've used and seen work in other places. The functional way that this is structured, it retains that 50% removal threshold. So the developers still have to take care to remove as few trees as they can. But when they do exceed that 50% threshold, the threshold is actually measured now by tree crown cover instead of by individual trees and tree surveys and those other kinds of mechanisms. So it's easier and more efficient for a development company to estimate and calculate what their current stand is, what their current stock is. And then for every 2,000 square feet above that 50% removal, they have to plant one new tree. We've increased in this language, proposed to increase anyway, the replant size to 3 inch rather than 2.5 inch. So a slight increase, although that's a a substantive difference. 3-inch caliber or DBH trees are commonly available, so it hasn't gone beyond what they are likely to be able to acquire in the marketplace. But it should help reforest the area a little quicker with the replanting. Then just that half-inch does in fact make a pretty reasonable difference. The larger, they're taller, they have a bigger crown when they're planted, but still of adequate size where they're going to grow immediately and quickly. So that is 2,000 square feet is the number that is would be the crown cover of a typical deciduous shade tree like a maple or oak of a 25-foot diameter or 25-foot radius tree. So, and at maturity, most of those trees are going to be a little bit beyond that, but that this way we avoid overplanting areas. Woodlands that are, and that way they grow naturally. Trees grow up in places that they probably aren't really going to survive very long because when they get crowded, the crowns can't develop as much leaf, and as a result, you see in natural woodlands a lot of dieback because of that. So the 2,000 square feet helps us know that the replanting should be remain healthy through the natural life of that vegetation. So that's the approach here. Still at 50%, but a different way of measuring and then a different way of requiring replacement. We retained the plant offsite or fee standard just in case a developer is not capable of actually getting a replanting in for whatever reason. You never know, so that's still a good backup, but we hope that this does two things. It makes it easier for everyone to calculate what the coverage requirement is. It hopefully incents them to do a little better job of cutting when they're doing their grading. Because the increase in tree size is a little bit incentive, a little more incentive to avoid replacement planting as much as possible. And then finally, for developers that don't do a good job in construction, whether it's developer, builder, whatever it may be, the replacement tree would actually be a 6-inch diameter tree that typically would have to be spaded in. The presumption is if they've gone beyond their limit that they're allowed to, and then not complied with the replacement plan that they were required to comply with, there would be a more instant reforestation requirement. 6-inch tree is obviously not a mature tree, but it's large enough to make an impact in a neighborhood, and hopefully the requirement that they spade in trees is enough of a disincentive for them to be careful when they're doing their construction. So that's the structure of the main part of the replacement ordinance. We added some proposed changes to a few other sections here, and just to make sure we were syncing up with between our zoning ordinance landscaping requirements as well as the subdivision preservation requirement. We did look at the current landscaping requirement. Right now, the code has a series of trees that are acceptable trees to plant. That list has not been updated very recently because there are a few trees on there that nobody anymore advises that we plant, green ash being one, even Norway maple, which is a very common tree, planted very commonly, but is no longer a tree that's advised to be planted. And there are a little bit other varietals that are listed in this list that are probably available, but certainly are not encompassing of all the trees that are available. And so this list is a little over-inclusive. It includes some trees that shouldn't be on there, and it's under-inclusive because it doesn't include a lot of trees or varietals that could be very acceptable species. So instead, we recommended changing that language to trees that are specified by the American Nursery Stock Standards, which is a very commonly applied standard for nursery stock and very well set up for both soil conditions and USDA climate zone. So you can look on that list to find out exactly what are the appropriate trees, both the developer who's planting and staff who's reviewing, and everyone else will have a good way to know that. And they keep it update all the time. So we thought that that was a more appropriate reference list than the more static way that it's structured in the code. I think that's the main changes that are here. I will mention that Commissioner Frauman brought up an interesting idea at the prior meeting, and that was the kind of the tree benefit concept. And I talked to my staff member, landscape architect. He was familiar with that. We talked through it quite a bit. It's an intriguing idea because right now we say a tree is a tree, basically, right? If it fits our standard, it fits our standard. And that concept looks at trees more from the kind of a holistic approach. You know, what kind of benefits does that tree? How long does it live? What kind of wildlife might it support? All those factors that get built into that structure. Our concern with it, and the reason we didn't apply it here, but you know, again, we can have that conversation. But we felt it was probably going to be a difficult one to apply, write a code for, number one. But then also there was a little bit of subjectivity in terms of reviewing a landscape plan that might rely on some of those values, because the values have to be selected by the community. And I mean, I have a background in landscape architecture, but I don't know if any of you do. And so we could probably argue about you know, what the relative values of those benefits might be. So so we didn't go that direction, mostly from the complexity issue, not any no disparagement on the idea, because I think it's kind of a cool idea, but for an ordinance approach, we were concerned about trying to build it in that way. So I just wanted to mention that we didn't ignore it. We thought it was something certainly worthy of investigation, but the ordinance draft here for your review takes a little more traditional approach. Like I said, we kind of replaced the list idea, but stuck with that kind of an approach here. So with that, Mr. Chair, I'd be happy to answer any questions about the language or any of the details in front of you. And
I just had one thing I wanted to clarify. Did you say that a 24-inch wide tree covers 2,000 square feet of canopy on average?
yeah, well, it depends on the species.
Roughly?
But if our rule of thumb that the data that we use is a 3/4 mature tree, basically 3/4 of its lifespan would be somewhere around 2,000 square feet, depending on the tree and all kinds of other things.
And that's where you get the replacement of one, because one will grow into basically the equivalent of what you took down. Okay.
Right, that's the idea.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Any discussion, questions?
Oh, who will be monitoring the trees that are planted?
The applicant, when they do a project, has to submit a planting plan as part of their project. And so we would review that as against the code requirements, just like we do now. But we think this will be a little easier, but we would do that as part of our review. And then when a project is being constructed, there's a inspection protocol. So
And who does the inspection? Will it fall on city administration to implement this?
usually the inspections are part of the engineer staff, and that is actually paid for out of a fund that is supplied by the developer.
Okay, so it won't be burdensome to city administration?
No, we don't believe so. It'll actually be less burdensome in our view.
Yeah.
Once they have, I'll just tag on to that answer. They have to prepare a plan that shows where they're going to plant, how many trees they're going to plant, how does that compare to those that are being removed. So there's a calculus there as to whether they're meeting the code requirement, and where they're gonna plant then afterward, replant. So the plan is gonna say, red maple here, white oak here. And then they build that subdivision, and the inspector can go out and say, yep, there's the tree, there's, they can,
Well, planning and zoning doesn't see that.
we don't see the construction side, the engineer
The
inspector
engineers
does,
and
right?
present it to council for approval.
If there's a concern, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, reading through it, it does make it a lot easier with the changes that have been
I'm gonna get it.
proposed.
Yes, a lot easier for administration.
And that was gonna be one of my questions with the tree list. When all the trees are listed out, it's like,
I think the reality is that tree list pretty much gets ignored, because it's just not relevant now. So,
yeah.
What website would you go on to determine what trees?
the American Nursery Stock Standard, they can look them online. They'll have trees listed by, like I said, by climate zone.
Because the DNR does not have a comprehensive list.
The DNR maintains a list of noxious plants, not necessarily proposed plants. Although part of the DNR's website is a little different. I mean, they do make some recommendations for certain conditions, but
Or plants, whatever, it's hard to follow.
yeah, and they are coming much more from the native natural approach than a varietal nursery stock. So.
That's excellent information, I thought it was really. That's a very-
Probably close the public hearing. Jess?
Yeah, you can make a motion for that.
Okay. We have a motion to close the public
Motion to
hearing.
close.
I'll second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Close the public hearing at 7:18 and reopen the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting.
That would be premature.
What?
Move to, that we adopt the amendment for subdivision ordinance as proposed.
I'll second that.
Yeah, it's very, a lot of work went into this and I very much appreciate it.
Come on.
Yep.
Well, great.
Okay. And we'll take a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Well, I didn't hear what the
I
recommendation is.
move that we accept the amendment as written.
Yes, I agree.
Okay. Any opposed? Okay, we'll forward this on to, forward this to City Council for their review. Any old business?
I don't think we have any old business.
Any updates, Mr. Griffin?
I mentioned briefly Creekside Hollow is still hanging out there. I'm not sure I know all the updates from the developer's side, but they had a couple issues. One was related to the construction of the creek crossing, an expensive endeavor, and they're trying to figure out how to deal with that. They would prefer not to deal with it. And the tree preservation issue is still outstanding. So if the council adopts this code based on recommendations here, they'll probably change the calculus on that side of it, but still have the street creek crossing issue to deal with.
No.
Yeah, they have requested to extend to go to the December council meeting. So they want a couple months to look at stuff still.
That's great.
Okay. All right, then, if there's nothing else, our next meeting will be Wednesday, November 9th, 2022, here at the community center at 7 PM. And And I will adjourn the meeting at 7:26.
I second it.
Adjourn.
Thank you, everybody.
Light range starts in 5 minutes.
That's one.